right, well, welcome everyone. It was nice to meet everyone in the room. Sorry, we're getting some weird feedback, so we're just going to try to block that out. So today we're talking about residential curriculum. Mia and I have been working with this since we started implementing it on our campus. We attended the Residential Curriculum Institute as an institution for the last couple years. This past year, we really decided it's time to change over to this curriculum model. So far, it's been great. It's an intensive process, but we're really excited to show you what we can do. And so we'll get started.
And stop us if you have questions. Right now, we're my screen is small, it's a map, but I would you guys to introduce yourselves if you wave at me, if there's a question at the table, then I can see you guys, and we'll stop. And yeah, we don't really love to just make presentations, so
yeah,
we want interaction. If you want to just stop us and ask questions, or you want to talk about something, then just give us a wave and we'll stop there.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about what is residential curriculum. And while it is residential curriculum, this curriculum approach is definitely transferable to other areas. We think they should package it to network to other areas. I think that's a definite opportunity. So as we're talking, know that these things are certainly you can implement in your different positions on campus. So we're going to talk about the curriculum approach, what we've accomplished so far here on campus. We had an institute with Dr. Keith Edwards. He's sort of our guru when it comes to curriculum. He's worked with the Curriculum Institute. He's involved with ACPA and all sorts of different things. And then we're also going to talk about our plan moving forward. And so it's an update of where we're at and where we're going.
So just some of you had mentioned that you're kind of familiar with residential curriculum. So we'll just kind of start there, just a recap for you. And for those who have not heard of this before, I have never heard of this until I transitioned over into residential life for this opportunity. So Keith Edwards came to S&T and hosted a plenary session on residential curriculum. What is it? So basically, it is a curriculum or a plan that's driven by an educational priority and educational learning goals. So that needs to be very institutional specific, which is how we developed ours. We did a little bit of a dig with our strategic plan, our website, our campus culture, and we worked with the RDs, we worked with students to try to figure out what our priority and our educational learning goals will be. And from there, what we do is we develop these plans, and they're already set in place for next year. So plans they can be area specific, so residential areas. We have our first year plan, we have an upperclassmen plan, and then we have a plan that's very specific to an area on campus called Minor Village, which the area is just different, so it needed a different plan. It needed kind of different activities and learning outcomes and strategies for those students. We also are developing plans for our fall leaders, both in selection and in training. And eventually down the road, we are going to develop a plan from this educational priority and these learning goals for hiring professional staff and for training professional staff. So it's going to kind of really take over our department and really guide our department. All of these plans are living documents, and that's the one thing the perfectionists and all of us are trying to mitigate a little bit, is that we're going to implement these plans, we're going to implement lesson plans, and then we're going to assess, was it good, was it bad? How did we do? How did the students do? What can we change for next year? So we really incorporate that formative and summative assessment in a very meta way, because we're evaluating ourselves as well as our students.
So we think it's important to address the programming model versus curriculum model. We are all programmers in this group right now. Y'all introduce yourself and you do programming. That's what we do. And so to talk about the difference, so the programming model, traditionally speaking, you identify a list of general priorities, categorize and bullet point, and it's sort of this you encapsulate what's happening in each residential area. You translate that into a list of requirements for the RAs and the hall directors. So RAs must do X programs, they must cover these topics. So kind of, again, sort of, throwing a dart at the board, not necessarily drawing that target first. These are often based on reactions of needs. So needs assessment programming is a term I know I'm guilty of using a lot. And that's how we talk to our RAs about how do they address issues within their community, how do they program to meet the needs of their community. And then programming topics and implementation strategies, they're often the responsibilities of those RAs, of those student staff members or student organization leaders on the ground. And so one thing that keeps coming up with the curriculum approach is that who's the expert? You know, our 19-year-old students implementing programs in the residence halls, are they the expert on student learning outside of the classroom? The curriculum approach says no. And so what that looks like is a clearly defined and more narrowly focused educational goal. So we start with that educational priority, big picture, looking at our division, our department, our campus goals and strategies, and then funneling that down to what we really need to be doing. So it's based on professional assessment of student educational needs. Again, the process our team has been going through the last 2 months has been looking at that. The view of co-curricular learning as learning over time and learning via sequence. So we look at each student, you know, from first year, second year, you know, junior, senior, individualistically. And so it's a progression that we want them to move from then we get them as a first year student. Here's where they're at. Here's developmentally what's appropriate for them. And where do we want them to be as they leave our halls, as they graduate and move on. And so it's that progression of that sequence learning.
One of the things that Keith would always say to us in the mini residential curriculum institute was, like, what kind of neighbor do you want them to be in 25 years? Like, those are the kind of the progressive learning that we want. You know, like, we kind of had an oh my God moment when we were like, transcripts aren't going to matter in 25 years. Right? Like, they're not going to matter. So like, that's the sort of thing we're hoping that we eventually get them.
And then the last thing, I think partly one of the most important things is we look at programming as just one of the strategies for educating our students. And so thinking outside of that box, one of the approaches that we keep going back to is the intentional conversations. And so shifting that RA role from that programming expert to that community development expert. And so rather than spending their time programming, and they will do some of that, they're actually doing monthly or 2-3 times a semester, connecting with students one-on-one and having focused conversations that the professional staff team actually dictates. That in August or September, you're going to go and talk to each resident one-on-one and see how their roommate situation is. You're doing roommate agreements, those sort of things. And so it's about that interaction piece. And so we'll get into more strategies as we move forward, but I think that's something important to highlight, is that programming is only one strategy for enhancing student learning.
Yeah. We struggle with that too, because we try to use program as like an interchangeable word. It carries so much weight. So ACPA published this list of 10 essential elements on residential curriculum. This is something that drove the Residential Curriculum Institute. I'm not going to read it for you. I sit in a grad class every week here in St. Louis, and you guys can read through it so you can kind of see. But we it starts with that dig that that I talked about, kind of taking the temperature of your own institute, because what works for Missouri S&T hopefully is going to work very well. It's not going to work for another institute. It's not going to work for another college or university. It really has to be unique to that institution, which I think brings a lot of meaning. Excuse me. I
think some things I want to highlight from this list, because it really does guide the process. And so if your office decides to move forward with this, or you want to pitch it, this is where you start. This is the process. But the things to identify is the big picture is painted before we go out and recruit any stakeholders to get involved in our programming. So we know exactly what we want students to learn before we go out and say, hey, career office, we want you to come in September before the career fair and actually talk about talking to employers or getting your resume ready. So we have a targeted plan in place before we go in and work with our partners. And that's been a shift for us. It's not necessarily something that's easily understood, that our partners would just assume that we'd always do these programs. We want to get creative with our partners, and so that's definitely been a hurdle for us to frame that message. Beyond that, assessment also looks different for us. We are actually really excited about assessment. I'm looking around for my assessment book, but we're finding new ways to gauge student learning. It's not about how many programs we've done, what kind of programs. Yes, those things are collected. Our vice chancellor still wants to know that information. We have to prove that we are needed, that our jobs are meaningful. But more than that, we want our teams really focused on our students learning what we want them to learn. Are we achieving the goals that we're setting? And so it just looks different. And one of our strategies is doing some reflection on note cards. It's very simple, but we ask the students after a program, what's the muddiest point? So what is something that didn't resonate with you? And that way, that informs our program for next time that we present it. these are the things that didn't click with the students. So we need to reassess how we're delivering that information.
Really quick, I have a question for you guys. Does anyone have an ed background where you were Master of Arts in teaching, or you started off with teaching in any sort of regard, or are familiar with this?
Nope.
No. Okay. The only reason I say that, so this book that Joni's talking about, and we'll show you when we get back and we share our screen, is actually a really good tool.
Someone borrowed mine.
Oh, sorry, and I didn't bring mine today. But we'll get John a copy of the title. It's a real. My background is in education. I was a high school. I'm supposed to be a high school teacher. I never landed up in high school, but having some sort of background in assessment, or having at least that book that can guide you in how to do assessment is really, really helpful. And it's not as complicated. Like, assessment is a scary word because it is. It's like all about measuring numbers and, you know, the median and the deviations and everything like that they want, the big leadership in the division want. But it's easier to like have that sort of. You see, sorry, go. Question.
Yeah. I have one quick question for you. So on this 10 essential elements, the research and development theory, so we've done co-curriculums here, and so we've really tried to figure out what kind of theories we can put to. We do co-curriculum, so we do it's part academic, but then what they're doing outside of the classroom. So like leadership programs, things like that, institutes, and putting those all together. What kind of ways did you find that you could use your theories in each of these curriculums? Like what kind of theories really helped to move this forward? Because I think that was one of the major struggles that we ran across. Like we looked at Perry's theory a lot and applied that, but you know, you talk about you have your first years and then your upperclassmen, and their needs are different. And do you look at that differently based off of your theory, or how does that work for you guys?
Yeah, we have an upperclassmen plan, we have a first year plan. So again, these buildings are a little intermixed. So you have first year, second year students primarily in our traditional residence halls. You have our upperclassmen in our apartment style residence halls. And so while I don't know that we were actually pulling out theory and referencing it, it's the internal knowledge of first year students have these developmental needs. They're trying to learn, you know, interdependence and all those sort of things. And as you know, the older students are going through other developmental things. So it's about separating them in those groups first. That's how we sort of manage that in our heads, and certainly addressing the developmental needs of those students based on where they're at and, you know, their academic experience.
I think too that it's less the bigger picture and more the lesson. So, like, you know, having that stake in the ground of number 3 based on research and development theory, it's reminding us that as we put together lesson plans, we think about where we're going to meet our students and where they are. You know, you can think of those social development theories and those cognitive theories on a lesson plan basis. So if we're dealing with something like, you know, Jody and I were just talking about putting together some sort of a year in review, 1 year from coming November from like the Mizzou that was going on at Mizzou. You know, it might be really good for us to sit down and when we're creating that lesson plan and take a look at white student development theory or Black student development theory, and you know, how can that inform what we're doing so that we can do something that's appropriate, meet our students where they are, and not get frustrated. Like a lot of our colleagues, and even we shared frustrations working with our students who just didn't understand what was going on. So I think that you're going to find it too at a very kind of focused level as well.
Good question.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So talking about what we've already accomplished, we have developed our educational priorities, so our overarching statement that identifies what students can gain from living in the residence halls. That's really the question we asked when we developed that. We also are using it as a marketing tool, and we'll talk about that in a minute when we share what it actually states. We developed our learning goals. We have 3 learning goals, and that's a small number, but Keith really pushed us to, again, think broadly, but also stay focused. It was a weird experience for us. We got really in our head through the process, and he really pushed us to identify what is minimally important. From there, we packaged our learning goals. We've developed learning outcomes and narratives. So we'll jump into what all that means.
Yeah, and at this point, we've already also accomplished educational plans and a bunch of lesson plans too. So
this was a month ago. Oddly, life happens fast with curriculum.
Which is nice. So our big bolded educational priority is that students will discover themselves and their impact. Very straightforward, very kind of just working on who our students are and what they can do with that. Underneath, you see our educational goals. So these are the 3 educational goals. So students will understand how to develop self-awareness. Students will understand how to communicate across differences, and students will understand how to engage in communities. So that's how they're going to discover themselves and their impact. You can kind of see we had one of our colleagues made this while we were at the residential curriculum. She's just super talented. Like, it's one of those things, like, I'm trying to take notes and figure out what the heck was going on, and she's like, here, I figured it out. And I made a graphic to represent that.
She's our marketing person.
She's our marketing person. She's awesome. So.
All right, so getting more into our learning goals, the first one is develop self-awareness. We work on a STEM campus, and we know they come in with social challenges. I mean, you met John. That was a joke. We love you, John.
Good thing John. Good thing John is not real.
So anyways, just fleshing that out. Each student will understand how to develop self-awareness. So they will be able to articulate their own identity. So that's where we get into that theory stuff you were just talking about. So the white identity development, so on, all their identity. They'll be able to practice self-care. We thought that was really important. A lot of our students they work really hard in their classes, but they forget to do things like take showers, or go to the gym, or eat well, or emotionally take care of themselves,
or sleep.
Yeah,
not sleep.
All the things. Resilience was something that just kept coming back up with our team. We want our students to develop that resiliency, and that's it is a little bit of a catchphrase in the work we do in student affairs right now. Resiliency is something that's been talked about, but for our students especially, how do they get a D? Like, they've never done that. They're academically really sound coming in, but that first and second year are challenging, and so how do we help them develop that resiliency to bounce back? And then learn through self-reflection. Again, that self-awareness piece was really important to us in our campus, because our students tend to keep their head down, study, and we want them to really think about themselves critically. And so that paragraph at the bottom, you can read that. That's how we, again, fleshing things out, expanding on what we actually mean with this, and it helps our staff, helps resonate with our staff, and help us articulate what we're doing.
So the second one is communicate across differences. When we created this PowerPoint, and when we came up with this learning goal, we thought this was going to be very simple, communicate across differences, but it has proven to be one of the more challenging learning goals as we are working with it as professionals. So it's not just communicating, it's not just articulating who you are or being able to talk, but it's being able to do that across differences. So each student is going to be able to effectively listen across differences, respectfully articulate thoughts and feelings across differences, and then we wanted to include celebrate differences. So more than just acknowledging, yeah, we're different and we can coexist, but celebrating that. We want to get to our students to that point. So in here, you'll see things like emotional intelligence, conflict management. This is where we really kind of foster that with our students. So hopefully you guys have a chance to read that bottom piece, but it seems straightforward. I promise you, we have struggled with this one a little bit and making sure that we're really adhering to that across differences component of the learning goal.
Okay. In our last learning goal, engage in communities. This is like a res life stuff, right? This makes complete sense for us. So we want our students will be able to identify with the community. And so whether that's their own residential community or they're in a design team working on, a solar house or what have you, we just want them to engage in community. And so while we would love for everyone to love their RA and their floor and be happily and yay, we recognize that it's our job to make them, help them find the best fit. So whatever that looks like for them. And that's something we fleshed out a lot. We want them to explore their impacts within the community. And so, again, that's sort of the social justice component. It's, we want them to be aware that there's a world outside of S&T, and so engaging in volunteer opportunities and, those who are having a different experience than they are. And then lastly, demonstrate leadership in the community. And so that's sort of the bystander intervention stuff. We want them to step in and lead when they need to. We want them to just be able to develop those just general leadership skills and transfer that to the workplace after they leave. Mm-hmm. Okay, so where do we go from here? We have already, this is a presentation we presented during our Student Affairs Division meeting last month, and so it's already expired, but we'll fill you in where we're at. We've already developed our MAP rubric, and so that's our overarching rubric that we're using for all student learning. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we can, let's jump ahead for that so you can kind of see. So our MAP, we developed a MAP rubric, and it's, there you go. Here's just an example of it, and it's really small, so bear with me here, but our rubric really is for, if you look at it, if you were to look at the none or beginner category, that's going to be where our first year students are, probably in none. we'll put them there. Our upperclassmen will be beginner to intermediate, and then hopefully by the time that they leave the residential life department, hopefully by the time they move off campus or graduate, they are hopefully proficient. And so it's that progression, and it reminds us as professionals that, you know, when we're talking about something like what's going on, what happened at Mizzou, and we're talking to students in our first year residence halls, we're not bringing them to a proficient level where, for example, they're engaging in advocacy for students who are different than they are, right, or minority students. That you would be jumping way too far, and competency-wise, that's not gonna work. So it reminds us that we have to move kind of slowly through that process and get them from none to beginner. So if you look here, this is just an example. They can articulate. This is for demonstrating self-awareness. So each student will be able to articulate their identities. A beginner student maybe chooses not to or is unable to communicate their personal identities, right? Working with them in that first year, maybe they can communicate at the beginning level their personal identities when they're coaxed to do so, right? And those identities might just be superficial or they might be obvious. And again, this is where you can pull in a little bit of that theory. The intermediate student can communicate their personal identities, and there's a depth to that in terms of their self-awareness, and a proficient student can poignantly communicate their personal identities. So they do so unprompted. They know kind of the superficial stuff, the depth stuff. They can go at kind of across the spectrum with that. So this is what kind of guides us. We've really kind of held to this. It's been nice as we've developed these plans, because you know, the first year plan is going to work on that none and beginner student.
There. Sorry. We've developed educational plans. Again, we have a first year plan, we have an upperclassman plan, and we have a special plan for our more traditional style apartments. Those students seek more autonomy, and so we saw the need for an additional plan for that. We're currently working on educational plans for a couple of our living learning communities. That's something that's come along slowly. This summer we'll be developing plans for student staff selection, student staff training, and our hall leader training, as well as some other ones probably. You can have an educational plan for anything, and again, that's why this is transferable, because if you're working with orientation leaders or peer mentors or whatever that is for you, you can certainly develop educational plans for everything.
Here's an example of one that's a little bit off of the beaten path. Joni and I have been working with the director of residential life, kind of in talking about how do we create almost like a professional development educational plan for our central office staff. Specifically, one problem that we wanted to address, if you're going to make this plan, was when students come in and that they have a room change, for example. We wanted to be cohesive, the process to be cohesive, with an RD sitting down and saying, okay, like why? What's going on? Face some conflict? That's awesome. Okay, now let's talk about this. Instead of saying, sure, that's fine, and then we find out, later that they never even went to an RA, they never went to an RD, they just wanted to get out of the situation rather than working through it. So that's just kind of an example of how you can go from there.
After we get our educational plans going, lesson plans will be developed for every strategy that's outlined within there. We've already started implementing lesson plans for things like our staff orientation processes. And so giving the RDs that resource to guide the conversation, the program, and how it needs to be guided to meet those learning outcomes. So it's very exciting. we'll be doing or creating an assessment plan. And again, it's not assessing necessarily how many things we're doing. It's what is learning happening. And so it's going to be awesome to have that feedback as we review our curriculum at the end of next year. Actually, as ongoing. So, and then engage campus partners,
which we're already starting to do, and we actually had an opportunity to do that last week.
Mm-hmm.
So we're testing it out. It's happening. This kind of gives you an overview of the MAP rubric. I won't really go into this, but I said it before in the example, but it's that measuring the student's competency throughout their entire time in residential life. So, educational plans, we talked about that. Okay, this is kind of an example of what an educational plan looks like for us. We have our 3 learning goals, shorthand at the top, and then we fit in throughout the different months different strategies that we would use to address those learning outcomes or those learning goals.
So next we'll show you some sample strategies. Again, this is removing ourselves from the traditional programs. So for the first year educational plan, the core strategies we identified were the intentional conversations I touched on earlier, community meetings. We were having community meetings maybe once or twice a semester, but we saw those as a great opportunity to engage. Bulletin boards, those aren't going away. And then roommate agreements. We haven't had a formal roommate agreement process, and we really feel that's going to help address some of the conflict stuff that comes up and just allow us to have more intentional conversations with students. For the second year area, you'll see some of the same ones, and that was intentional. And the second year educational plan is actually for our kind of hybrid apartments, so to speak. And that's, I think I called it our upperclassmen plan. I misspoke, my bad. But anyway, you're going to see some of the same ones to build that consistency. We want students to be able to expect what their experience is going to be like as they live with us for 2-3 years. And so we have the apartment agreements. Events is sort of an informal way to engage the students. I don't know, it's more of informal programming looking back, but. And then Minor Village is the traditional style apartment setting that we have. Again, you're going to see some of the same ones. There was also a social media aspect that they added, or that the resident director added to that, which I think is really unique as well.
What's really cool is that we have found as we've grown, even as we're looking at this month-old presentation, that we're like, oh, we're kind of, we know better than this at this point. We're even more familiar with it. But Joni brought up a really good thing in a workshop that we had a couple of weeks ago, and that's that we really need to start redefining some of these buzzwords. Like in student affairs, we have these words that just carry so much weight with them. And one of the things that she really focused in on was the community meeting. We found that a lot of our classes hung up on the word community meeting, or the phrase community meetings, having a capacity, and here's the list of what I need to present to you. And so Joni took the opportunity at a workshop a few weeks ago and said, we need to redefine this. Like, a community meeting is not a community meeting in that one person stands up and talks to you. Like that strategy is more that there are 20 or 30 people coming together in a room, and so we're gonna interact in some sort of way, and it's going to be a discussion. It's going to be, I don't know, anything. It could be anything, but it's not going to be just I'm giving you information, which is kind of how we see meetings,
Even programming sometimes.
Yeah.
We got a question.
Oh, yep. Question.
So I'm just curious, on your plans, do you take into consideration, like, if they were a first-year student and they've already gone through you've already been part of the first year plan, is it different for them? Like, I don't know if I'm making sense. Like, the second year plan is different from the first year. So, like, is there consideration that they've already gone through the first year plan, or if they are a transfer student, and so they're technically a second year student and they haven't had the, foundation for the curriculum?
Yeah, so one thing, we struggled with that because, for example, one of our halls is Thomas Jefferson Hall. And while it is primarily first-year students, we have sophomores sprinkled throughout. And we like that because we believe that our returning students set the tone and talk, they give an example of what it's like to live in a residence hall. And so in a lot of ways, they help manage conflict for us. And so it's important for us to have that kind of mixture. And so Keith really challenged us to look at the majority of the students living in that area and assign it to an educational plan. And so Thomas Jefferson Hall is on the first year plan, and we know that there's going to be sophomores living there. And so our thought is that, as they come back for that second year, they might pick different programs or activities or strategies that we're implementing to attend or engage with based on where they're at. And so it's certainly a wide brushstroke. But Keith promises that he promised us that would really that we just had to go for that, because it's not individualistic at all. It's certainly by area where we have students kind of clustered.
Also, too, it's not the same every year. It's not going. It can't be. You know what I mean? Like we're looking at some of the different strategies and different plans, and probably a good percentage of them, we're going to turn around and go, wow, that sucked. Like that was not the right way to do that. We need to rethink how we approach this learning goal. So while the learning is going to be the same, while we're still facilitating that learning, we have to be mindful of how we do it and what, incorporate some of those best practices, which goes back to your theory. So we're, looking at, as people are publishing about this and studying this and including it in their dissertations or including it in their theses, we're going to start to kind of flag those things and say, what's working and what's not, and what is a good way to have students learn this. And it's going to be trial and error for us. So next year there's going to be a revamp, and what did we really love, and let's keep that, and what did we really not like, let's try a different approach. So there won't be too much of that repetition, and I think some of the intentional conversations that you see too are going to facilitate processing that. One thing we've been working on is giving students lenses to look through the same programs that they're doing. Like we're thinking for some of the training and some of the workshops that our student leaders are doing. Some of the complaints we get are, oh, we did this last year. Well, put on another pair of glasses and look at this through the lens of a senior RA, right, instead of an RA. And how is this different then? So we'll kind of frame that too and be more intentional about it.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Here, lesson plans.
Next one.
There are some additional strategies you can see: workshops, activities, spontaneous initiatives, social events, speakers, program series. We came up with Grab Bag. Joni and I have been working on one for our programming RAs, and we have Field Trip. Field Trip is one. Collaboration can be another one. So there's a bunch of stuff you can pull from for strategies. Yeah. Okay, so lesson plans. We are developing different lesson plans to specifically address each component of the educational plan, from intentional conversations to guest speakers and everything in between. So on these lesson plans, right now it seems like a daunting task because there's so much to write, but we essentially want these lesson plans to exist in a binder so that when we do sit down to have an intentional conversation with a student about how their roommate situation is going, we have some questions pre-generated and some follow-up questions that really are grounded in our educational priorities and our objectives and our learning outcomes. And that have some sort of assessment. So it's a follow-up. It's not just a, hey, I chatted with this individual, I don't know what else I could do. Did it set in? Did it sink in? Are our students really applying some of the stuff that we talked about in this intentional conversation? Lesson plans aren't set in stone, and it's not something that we want to blanket with every student. So for example, an intentional conversation is something that's pretty individualized. But as long as those core questions are there is freedom for creativity, and there's freedom for follow-up questions, and there's freedom to personalize the conversation, really being mindful of rooting it in the priorities and educational objectives.
Yeah. And I think for traditional programming, one thing I got caught up on was how does this work? But really, when you do a program, you create an outline, hopefully you have learning outcomes, so we're already doing a lot of this. It's just expanding on that and identifying different strategies within the lesson plan to make it interactive, to foster conversation. That's been a huge part of all the lesson plans we've had, is that facilitation piece. And so it's just a more intentional approach to a lot of the things we're already doing. And so with the RAs, they will get lesson plans. I think we're actually calling them guides, because lesson plans sounds real stuffy and teachery. We get that. And so they're getting guides to these intentional conversations, to their community meetings. If we're going to ask them to do some presentation or programs, they'll get a lesson plan for that. So they're not developing. We're going to give them the well thought out developed plan or guide. They just have to kind of make it their own, and we'll talk to them about areas that they can tweak and stylistically and those sort of things. But a lot of ways it's just making it easier and more targeted. And we're almost done here.
Those are lesson plan components.
Yeah.
One thing that Joni and I stressed out about was, oh my God, what is the lesson plan supposed to look like? And so I think we asked Keith for an example. He didn't give us he pushed us, there we go, to pick our own style. And that was a little bit nerve-wracking for our team, for me, because Jody was like, yeah, what do you want it to look like? I don't know. But we came up with, kind of what we want our lesson plans to look like. And it's very individual to our program and our team. And these are kind of the things that we just have on it, so that, you know how long it's supposed to be, what the purpose is, what those specific objectives and outcomes are going to be that drive that lesson plan. So when we actually do this, it's going to really give a good backbone to whoever's facilitating the strategy.
Yeah, and then lastly, again, our final step as we move forward is not really final, but engaging campus partners. So again, we've created the educational plans, we've set the direction, we've identified the learning strategies. So it's really about identifying the stakeholders, identifying pivotal moments for feedback, critique, and collaboration. So who do we want engaged in our revision process as we've implemented, and then we're taking a look back and seeing how it went, as well as those who can review educational plans, so who can provide us any feedback. So yeah.
I think for this one too, when we look at campus partners, at least I did. I assumed that they were going to be the similar or the same, campus stakeholders for all of this residential curriculum, and it's not turning out to be that way. Our first year students are going to have different stakeholders than our global awareness, living learning community, and that's going to be different from our second year ones, or our programming RAs, or whatever. It's different for everybody because of what we're looking to accomplish with those students, and because of their competencies. So, and because of even just the learning objective, something as very focused in as that. So it's kind of okay. There we go.
So we're happy to open up to any questions you have. We get that this is really heavy, and I personally, I don't have an education. The terminology, what's a priority, what's a goal, what's an outcome, and so we know that's a lot of heady stuff, and so we want to acknowledge that. But we're happy to answer any questions you have, and if you're overwhelmed, we'll answer questions later. Whatever you need.
Do you have are you tracking when a student events and programs?
Say that one more time.
Sorry.
Are you tracking to provide as part of your lesson plan?
I think, sorry, it's cutting it out. So I think what you asked, and tell me if I'm wrong, are we tracking the programs we're doing?
Or who's attending them? Is that what you asked?
Yes.
Tracking.
We totally. Oh, are you tracking what students are going to? Oh, okay. Sorry, it's not you. It's cutting in and out.
Yeah.
Blame S&T. We're a science and technology school that has terrible Wi-Fi.
So in terms of tracking attendance, we do intend on investing in some card swipe systems to track that information, but that also allows us to pull student email addresses for us to do the assessment on their learning. And so we're using it practically for assessment, but we will track that we're using OrgSync for that. We brought an umbrella. Are you an OrgSync campus?
No.
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 It's just
No.
So OrgSync is it's a student organization system that it has different components, but we're using it for a lot of different things, for community listservs, for helping our whole government organizations have a place to put stuff in and organize themselves. But it also has a function where it has a card swipe system where you can input students' information for X event they attended. So we can track independent individual user data. So, 15 students with this program. And then you can also look at over time, like X student went to X number of programs over the course of the semester. There also is some functionality, I believe, to do like resident tracking with the intentional conversations. We're just now, we're doing a lot right now, but we're just now implementing and starting up our umbrella, and we'll launch it in the fall. So we're not sure of all the functionality, but we will track users.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you.
No, I'm making fun of the echo.
It's awful.
Like birds. John's gonna type any other questions you guys might have because we just can't hear.
Did you just tell him what he was going to do?
He's riding a bike. I love to tell John what to do. Thanks, John.
So we'll ask you a question, like what interests you about this, or let me turn that down, so I'm not going.
I don't know if you'll be able to hear us.
Oh.
Yeah, I'll give you $1 challenge.
Can she hear me?
Yes, I think so.
Yep, we can hear you.
I'm going to talk totally quietly. We do a lot of the stuff with the Center for Student Involvement. We do a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, except for lesson plans.
Mm-hmm.
So we track events, and we do that through Tiger Lake, and so we will and have other groups host, and we do a lot of collaboration. But because it's other groups, we don't necessarily create lesson plans, so we don't have that same intentionality behind those. It's the expectations of different groups that we're partnering with, that they are using whatever you're using. So we have partnerships with the leadership group on campus, and so we'll do all of our other leadership stuff through them, and we host certain things for them. So it's all collaboration and all based off of leadership theory, and they kind of create the lessons or bring in speaker and things like that. So yeah, a lot of the stuff that you're saying resonates with me in terms of the Center for Student Involvement. I'm not sure in terms of residential what they're doing specifically.
They're wanting to move towards having something like this, but unfortunately they don't have the manpower, and now we're only there for one semester into kind of the research side of it. So trying to move towards it, but I don't know what the likelihood is unless they get another person in there to really lead it. Yes, so like Jared was saying, the curriculum can be done on Tiger Link, but somebody from the separate department has to manage it. And so they're having trouble finding someone who would manage that side of things.
Interesting. Yeah, you brought up you work with the gentleman in the blue. I'm not sure. I can't remember your name. I'm sorry.
I'm Jared. Hello.
Hi, Jared. You brought up working with partners, and you're not creating those lesson plans. You're more relying on their expertise. While we're not really there yet, to be honest. We've chatted about that, and what I anticipate us doing is, our partners are experts, and so we certainly trust them to develop the lesson plans, but we will ask them to use the format we use. And that's transitional, so we can have that information as we assess, revise, review. And so we're hoping that goes over well.
The other thing is, like, the other day we had it was a spontaneous initiative, and it was in response to something that happened on campus, and we wanted to do it with a campus partner. So we created a lesson plan, and the lesson plan, just all it did was, for our team, it framed the discussion. But for the experts and the collaboration partner, right, all we did was say, hey, this is where we want our students to be at the end of this conversation. Like, this is the learning objective. And it was funny because they kind of panicked, like, what do you want us to say? Because the way that we had framed our piece was, we have these directives, like on our lesson plan, it'll say like, explain this and justify this and clarify this and then ask this question. And, we write it out in that sort of way so that we have that for ourselves, that we've said it the way that we want to say it and we've thought it through. And we were like, you take it in whatever direction you want. You guys are the experts. And they suddenly kind of second guessed themselves a little bit.
Funny.
It was a little bit funny. And we're like, don't be intimidated by the lesson plan. Like, be just, you know what you want to do by the end of it, do it. It's okay. So,
and the strategy we asked them to do is have a guided conversation to address student concerns and different things. Again, there was an incident on campus, and so we were baffled with, how do you not know how to do that? You're counseling. Like, I don't know how to tell you to do that, And so we just sort of got a chuckle and realized that, okay, whoa, we've given them too much in that situation. And so, we're learning as we go. It's kind of fascinating. You brought up I'm sorry, the woman at the end. I'm terrible. Holly.
Yes.
Okay, Holly, you brought up this in Res Life, and I know you just did a practicum internship with them last semester, I believe you said. And so one of the things we've talked about is there's never really a great time to implement this change. We are currently, I'm in an interim role. We're down an assistant director. We're down a coordinator. Mia's leaving in June because she's having a little one. And so, we're certainly facing some staffing challenges, but the real work is happening now. We know we're doing double time to get this stuff set in place. And this summer we'll be busy with preparing everything, but we've been promised by our guru that once it's in place, it's not more work, it's just different. And it's honestly, I'm so looking forward to it. And the RA is not doing programming, and then that's going to impact the length of our whole government meetings because they're going and presenting like 10 budgets a meeting for programs that probably don't need to happen. And so it's just scaling down, narrowing our focus, and I'm just so excited. Like, part of me just wished we could start now. And quite frankly, the RAs are like, can we do this now? Because I don't want to do program. I'm like, great, I don't want you to do program, but you have to do, so it's this negotiation. But just to address that, like the work is really on the front end of things.
The other thing too is it doesn't have to be immediate. This is coming from zero evidence, so let's just put that out there first. But like the way that S&T is doing this is fascinating because they're doing a lot. They have the manpower to do a lot. They created this position to help this along, my position to help this along. Everyone's on board with it. But like, we remind ourselves daily that, hey, we don't have to make an educational plan for every single, thing we do. We can keep some things as is. Like, the world wasn't burning before we switched to this model. It's not going to burn if we don't transition in a year. And so some of the things where we're like, oh my God, we're running out of time. It is already April 1st on Friday. We make an assessment and we say, nope, we'll table that. That'll be for next year. And that's okay. We implement it a little bit at a time and move on from there and see what works and what doesn't. And so hopefully that might alleviate some of that too.
Yeah. We realize we're getting a little nutty. We get so excited about this. So I apologize if you're vomited over you. But does anybody have any last questions? I know it's getting to time, so I'm going to be mindful of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I really wish you luck. I know it's hard being a grad student and finding time to add one more thing onto your plate. So kudos for coming. John has our contact information. So if you have any questions or just want to chat about this some more or whatever, even down the road as you find full-time jobs or whatnot, please let us know. It was so hard for us to not have an abundance of resources. We just had our guru, and so we're really happy to share anything we can. So
yeah, and if you find yourself, one thing Joey and I were saying is, if you find yourself in a place that's doing this or trying this or testing this out, definitely connect with S&T, because to go through this process with somebody who's facing similar challenges or having similar questions is kind of nice. It's a nice little support group.
Yeah. We have an addiction, I think, too.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Sorry.
So John, are we good?